In today's video, we're going to walk through how you can get a unified Blazor development experience with ServiceStack's Blazor components, maximizing code reuse, consistency, and performance between both Blazor Server and Blazor WebAssembly. Blazor Server provides a great development experience thanks to its fast hot reload performance, but coming from other client-server frameworks including Blazor WebAssembly, it can get confusing as to how it works and how that might play into your project design decisions. The much more common client-server approach is something that has shown to be extremely flexible when it comes to development and easier to understand since the role separation, especially within web development, is clearly defined. The browser is your client, and messages travel over HTTP to your server and back again with a response. When developing with Blazor Server, this works differently as the application is executed almost entirely on the server and the communication of messages from client to server is out of your control. UI updates, event handling, and JavaScript calls are handled over the WebSocket connection. The application state for a particular connection is isolated to what is referred to as a circuit. Every time you make an interaction with the UI, messages are going back to the server to update that application state for that circuit. Opening the Network tab in the Developer Tools, we can see the persistent WebSocket connection and Blazor Server specific message events going back and forth. If your page or component uses a HTTP client to integrate with a self-hosted service or controller, we won't see those HTTP calls in the client, because it's the server that's making them to itself. This different way of working has implications if you want to work with some existing code written specifically for a client-server application like services, controllers, or anything that usually communicates from a client to a server over HTTP, especially if authorization is involved. And since Blazor Server is relatively new compared to ASP.NET, wanting to use Blazor Server could mean refactoring a lot of what you already have and putting them into the dependency injection framework so you can access them directly in the context of a Blazor Server application. Two different ways of working for two different hosting models. This is not the case for ServiceStack's universal Blazor components and templates that offer a unified Blazor development experience. The ServiceStack Blazor library approach gives you the benefits of Blazor Server's rapid development while providing a familiar and unified API optimized for either hosting model. In this video, we're going to look at the ServiceStack Blazor Server template to show how it works and how we can use it to make your own universal Blazor components, as well as how this can help your team to maximize reuse between projects regardless of if they are hosted in a Blazor Server or Blazor WebAssembly application. First, let's create a new Blazor Server application using the ServiceStack.net website. Navigating to servicestack.net/Blazor, we can scroll down to the Create a New Blazor App section, provide a name, and download a zip of your newly templated Blazor Server application. Unzip the solution to a local working directory and open it with your favorite .NET IDE. Opening the main Appos project, we will see the usual startup process of a Blazor Server application in program.cs, as well as the _hosts.cs HTML file in the pages directory, which references our app.razor file kicking off our Blazor Server application. These are the three files used to initialize the ServiceStack integration that wires up our authentication and enables our Blazor Server application to interact with ServiceStack services through a consistent API. Starting from the entry point, the ServiceStack state provider is registered as the authentication state provider for our application. The ServiceStack state provider is actually declared in the template itself, specifically set up using the Blazor Server authentication state provider since this is a Blazor Server application. A base URL of our server is constructed pointing to localhost that is passed to the add Blazor Server API client method. This sets up our universal client API that can use this URL to make HTTP requests to our server, But since this is a Blazor Server application, by default it's configured to use an in-process client. This calls your registered services directly using the API async method on pages and components, along with user authentication info, which acts the same as if you called them over HTTP. So we not only get authentication with our restricted ServiceStack services, but we get a unified API that directly accesses our services without going over HTTP, while getting all the functionality of filters, validation, access control, and more. By having this universal approach of using the API async method to access our services over both HTTP and in process, it brings the worlds of Blazor Server and Blazor WebAssembly together, enabling us to create components and pages that can be reused or migrated between hosting models. We didn't need to wrap our service code and register them as dependencies to be injected for each and every operation. We kept the existing services as they are and called them the same way with a request DTO and getting back a response. Trying to do the same with MVC controllers, you would likely wrap your code as an injected dependency and call it directly, or use a HTTP client to get the same features you had before. And while this approach works, what is happening is the server is calling itself via HTTP. And if you are hosting your Blazor Server application behind a reverse proxy like Nginx proxy, it might come in via the proxy, creating more overhead depending on how you're resolving the host of your application. We can validate this by changing the Blazor config in program.cs to use the setting use in process client to false. Running our Blazor Server application and navigating to the to-do MVC page, we can test it by toggling items as to-do and finished. Looking at the output of our running application, we can see logs reporting each HTTP request as it's received and finished. And each time we toggle an item, we are calling update to-do and then querying our to-dos again for the updated data with query to-dos. By setting the use in process client option to true, our output is heavily reduced, showing that we are no longer sending a HTTP request to our own server. ServiceStack does this by using a registered service gateway that is used by default for the API async methods, or alternatively, you can specify to use the JSON API client or gateway directly to have finer control of how you want to access an API. If you are in an environment with microservices, you can still use the in-process gateway for internal calls and the JSON API client for known external integrations. And since these APIs are also consistent across Blazor Server and Blazor WebAssembly, migrating from one to the other involves very small amounts of code change. In fact, during the development of Blazor Diffusion, an AI image gallery with text-to-image generation using Stable Diffusion, we developed locally in Blazor Server and automated the migration of changes to a Blazor WebAssembly application. This gave us the ability to use a CDN for an optimal hosting setup while still benefiting from the rapid application development you get from using Blazor Server. Blazor Server offers an amazing developer experience, but because of its hosting model, it can create friction when it comes to architecting your application and reusing code from your existing services. By using the ServiceStack Blazor Server template, you can start your next project with the best of both worlds using our universal components and consistent unified APIs. Regardless of if you need to migrate to Blazor WebAssembly later or split the hosting of your services among different hosts, the consistent design of the ServiceStack integrations and the thoughtfully architected APIs means you can have confidence that these types of changes are catered for, enabling you to deliver solutions faster. Well, that's it for this video. If you have any suggestions or feedback about our templates or videos, let us know in the comments. If you want to know more, check out our other videos and join us in the ServiceStack community through our Discord and GitHub discussions. ServiceStack is free for individuals and open source projects, so anyone is welcome. And as always, thanks for watching.